The Horus Heresy is remembered as the most catastrophic civil war in human history, a betrayal so profound that it shattered the dreams of a united galaxy before they had even fully formed. The Emperor's greatest sons, the Primarchs, turned on him in droves, and with them, half the Imperium followed into madness and heresy. Worlds burned, brother slew brother, and the psychic wound left by that war still festers in the 41st millennium. It was a galaxy-wide trauma that humanity has never fully recovered from, and likely never will. And yet, for all its devastation, one question continues to haunt the edges of Imperial history like a shadow behind the throne. How did it happen? How did the Emperor, perhaps the most powerful psyker to ever live, a man who could peer into the future and who walked through time like a titan through mist, not see it coming? Why did he allow his most dangerous sons to grow unchecked, his people to fall into dogma, and his Imperium to rot from within? Was this failure truly a failure, or was it something worse? What if the heresy wasn't a blunder, but a design? This video explores a theory that recontextualizes the heresy not as a miscalculation, but as a crucible, a necessary evil. The theory that the Emperor, perhaps knowingly, perhaps through cold utilitarian foresight, allowed the galaxy to burn in order to forge something stronger from the ashes. That by engineering his own martyrdom, by ensuring the destruction of his body and the rise of a cult in his name, the Emperor could achieve something he could never claim while alive: true godhood. Long before the legions marched, before the dream of Imperium took shape in blood and steel, there was the Emperor, immortal, calculating, and already ancient when the first human civilizations were still learning how to write. But even he, it seems, was not above seeking power beyond his own grasp. According to forbidden texts and the whispers of lost lore, the Emperor may have made a pact with the very beings he would one day denounce as the greatest threat to mankind, the Chaos Gods. This wasn't simply a case of borrowing energy from the warp, as psykers do. It was a deliberate transaction. In return for knowledge, for power, for the blueprint to forge the Primarchs, the Emperor may have made a deal with the entities he planned to destroy. A deal he had no intention of honoring. If the Primarchs were indeed created with warp-infused essence, if they were part god and part gene laboratory miracle, then their eventual corruption was not just likely, it was inevitable. The warp is not a passive force. It is hungry, reactive, and deeply personal. To bind a soul to it, even partially, is to tie it to a chaos of infinite temptation. Whether the Emperor believed he could shield his sons from this fate, or thought he could use their strengths and discard their weaknesses, remains unclear. What is clear is that the very moment he reached into the warp to give life to his chosen champions, he invited chaos to pull them apart. The scattering of the Primarchs through the warp may not have been sabotage, it may have been payment. And so, the irony begins. The Emperor, herald of reason and architect of human supremacy, may have founded his empire on a foundation of corruption. The man who would go on to denounce chaos cults, outlaw sorcery, and destroy entire worlds for even minor heretical leanings, may have secretly trafficked with the dark gods themselves. Not because he served them, but because he believed he could outwit them. If this theory is true, then the heresy was not a sudden betrayal, but the inevitable debt coming due. A galaxy-wide reminder that no one, not even the Emperor, is beyond the consequences of dealing with the warp. The scattering of the Primarchs is one of the great tragedies of Imperial history, or so the story goes. As the Emperor's most ambitious creation neared completion, a mysterious warp breach tore open reality, hurling his gene suns across the galaxy like pieces of a shattered puzzle. For most, this was a sabotage by the ruinous powers, an act of defiance meant to break the Imperium before it could even begin. But what's never sat right is the Emperor's reaction, or rather, the lack of one. He didn't rage, he didn't stop, he didn't even slow down. The Great Crusade launched ahead on schedule, as if the loss of his demigod generals was little more than a logistical delay. That's not grief, that's preparation. So, let's reframe the event. If the Emperor had already struck a bargain with Chaos to create the Primarchs, could the scattering have been part of the payment? Or worse, was it part of the plan? Consider the destinations. Caliban, Colchis, Nostramo, Barbarous, worlds soaked in psychic corruption, religious fervor, or the oppressive stench of decay. Some were hellscapes, others were paradises built on lies. All were loaded guns pointed directly at the Primarch's psyche. Even on more stable worlds, the local belief systems, hostile environments, or outright demonic influences shaped the minds of the Emperor's sons long before he arrived to collect them. These weren't random crash landings, they were crucibles, and the sons that emerged were not perfect tools, but volatile men. By letting chaos scar them early, the Emperor created leaders capable of empathy, wrath, loyalty, and rebellion in equal measure. He didn't want perfect tools. He wanted flawed kings, men who could inspire millions and damn them in the same breath. If the heresy was to serve as a necessary civil war, then its actors needed motives, passions, and trauma. That kind of depth doesn't come from a lab-grown upbringing in a sterile palace. It comes from war, cults, monsters, and loss. Whether chaos hurled them or the Emperor allowed it to happen, the end result was the same. 20 kings were forged, and at least half of them just unstable enough to fall, right on cue. The imperial truth was supposed to be a bulwark, a clean secular doctrine of reason meant to safeguard mankind from the insidious influence of chaos and the superstition that allowed it to thrive. At least, that's what we were told. In practice, it was a purge, a cultural sterilization campaign that erased centuries of spiritual tradition across thousands of worlds. Temples were burned, texts destroyed, priests executed. Humanity wasn't just being protected from the warp, it was being spiritually lobotomized. No gods, no myths, no higher powers, only the Emperor and the cold, clinical light of science. But stripping away all belief doesn't make people rational. It just makes them hungry for something else to worship. And what was left to fill that void? The Emperor himself. Despite his refusal to be seen as divine, his actions reeked of calculated contradiction. He performed miracles and demanded silence. He saved worlds and insisted on anonymity. He created demigods and called them sons. This is the behavior of a man planting seeds, seeds he knew would sprout long after he was no longer around to tend them. And sure enough, the moment he fell silent on the Golden Throne, the cult of the Emperor surged into the heart of the Imperium like wildfire. Chapels, cathedrals, choirs of the faithful. His name became prayer, his image became law. He became a god, not because he wanted to, but because he left no one else to take the role. So what if this was always the plan? What if the imperial truth was never about secular purity, but spiritual monopoly? By denouncing religion, the Emperor ensured that when he did ascend, there would be no competition. He wasn't trying to destroy gods. He was trying to become the only one left standing. The heresy, the martyrdom, the silence, it all served to mythologize him, to transfigure a man into a legend and a legend into a deity. And in a galaxy where belief shapes reality, that kind of faith doesn't just echo, it feeds. Not chaos, not ancient pantheons, him. Every prayer carved into stone, every candle lit in a shrine, every voice raised in blind devotion, it all strengthens the one being who outlawed worship in the first place. The Emperor was not a fool. He knew the warp. He had studied the gods of chaos long before most of the galaxy even had names for them. And yet, when it came to the Primarchs, his most powerful creations, his sons, he told them next to nothing. No doctrines on how to resist temptation. No instruction on the nature of the entities they would one day face. No warnings, even as they walked directly into traps designed by gods. To call this a lapse in judgment would be generous. These were beings forged in the Emperor's image, born of both science and sorcery. And he let them grow up in ignorance, not just of chaos, but of everything that truly mattered. This omission becomes even more damning when we look at where the Primarchs ended up. Caliban, home of Lion L. Johnson, was a death world crawling with warp-touched beasts, creatures possibly birthed by the ruinous powers themselves. Lorgar landed on Kolkis, a theocracy whose entire belief system was suspiciously aligned with chaos dogma. Magnus, arguably the most psychically potent of them all, was permitted to dive headfirst into sorcery unchecked, building an empire of occultism on Prospero. In isolation, these might seem like oversights. Together, they form a pattern. The Emperor placed, or allowed, his greatest weapons to be forged by chaos. If we accept this as a possibility, then the implications are horrifying. The Primarchs were not merely leaders. They were test subjects, bait, chess pieces in a galaxy-spanning gambit meant to provoke disaster. By allowing some to fall, the Emperor ensured there would be a war, one violent enough to reset the galactic order and burn away his most unpredictable variables. The Horus Heresy becomes less a tragedy and more a controlled demolition, a purge by fire, a divine bloodletting where loyalty and treachery mattered less than the ultimate outcome: sacrifice, ascension, and faith. These sons were never meant to inherit the galaxy. They were meant to die in its reshaping. To most, the Golden Throne is a tragic symbol, a reminder of humanity's greatest failure. The Webway Project, the Emperor's final effort to unshackle mankind from the warp, lies in ruins. The Emperor himself, once the most powerful psychic being in existence, is now a half-dead husk, wired into a life-support sarcophagus that devours 10,000 psychers a day just to keep the lights on. It looks like a disaster, the ultimate cost of hubris. But look deeper, and the question becomes unavoidable. If this is a cage, why does it look so much like an altar? Every soul fed into the throne is a sacrifice. Every prayer uttered by the faithful is a psychic tithe. And unlike a mortal man, the Emperor doesn't grow weaker with death and worship. He grows stronger. His consciousness stretches across the warp, guiding the Astronomicon, touching the minds of his servants, and allegedly answering the prayers of the ecclesiarchy. In all but flesh, he acts like a god. And what better method of apotheosis than a machine that turns death, faith, and psychic energy into divine fuel? The throne may not be keeping him alive. It may be turning him into something more, something transcendent. From this view, the heresy takes on a grim new purpose. Horus's betrayal, the civil war, the martyrdom of heroes, it all culminates in a galactic ritual. Pain, blood, belief, and sacrifice on a scale so immense it rivals anything the chaos gods have ever orchestrated. And at the center of it all sits the Emperor, burning through psyche souls and bathed in worship, rising not just as a ruler, but as a god thing, born from the ashes of the Imperium. If his current position in the Golden Throne is a failure, it's a failure that happens to fulfill every requirement for godhood, almost as if it was meant to. If we take all of this at face value, if the whispers, coincidences, and bloody milestones are not accidents but deliberate marks on a divine ledger, then the Emperor's true ambition was never unity. It was transcendence. He wasn't building a paradise. He was building a mythos. The Horus Heresy becomes less of a civil war and more of a cosmic passion play, with the Emperor cast as both Messiah and martyr. The burning of Prospero, the betrayal at Istvan, the siege of Terra, all of it, brutal and senseless on the surface, suddenly looks like the scaffolding of a religion carefully constructed in blood. That doesn't make it less horrifying. If anything, it makes it worse. Because then we're left with a figure who sacrificed not just armies and worlds, but his own sons to become something more than human. If this theory holds, the Emperor isn't a victim of treachery. He's the architect of it. Horus, Lorgar, even Magnus, they weren't just rebels. They were pawns, knowingly or not, in a spiritual operation that dwarfed even the Great Crusade. Was he a genius tactician who saw the only path to divinity and walked it without flinching? Or was he a monster who fed the galaxy into the furnace of his own ambition? The most terrifying answer may be both. One way or another, the story of the Imperium was never about peace. It was about permanence, about creating a figure so central, so impossible to ignore, that he would outlive his own death. And in that, the Emperor has succeeded beyond measure. Whether you see this theory as revelation or heresy, one truth remains. The Emperor's greatest creation wasn't the Imperium. It was the narrative of the Imperium, the myth, the lie, the faith. Let me know what you think. Was the Horus Heresy a cosmic accident or a divine conspiracy? Was the Emperor just trying to survive or trying to ascend? And if you like this journey into the darker corners of Warhammer 40K, be sure to like, subscribe, and stick around, because there are many more conspiracies to unravel, and I intend to shed light on all of them.